Today's stuff we're going to be learning is Bava Batra Daf Kafpet. Today's stuff is sponsored for the Refuah Shlema of Asher ben Riva. We're going to get started now. I'm going to go back to the end of yesterday's stuff. I just want to clarify one thing. It's a little bit confusing. I can't promise this is the only way to explain it, but I'm going to try to make order out of this very last section. If you remember, our topic is competition in business. Can you open a store next to someone else's store? What are the criteria? So Rav Huna Braid Rav Yoshua kind of sets up what's very clear, and then he says what's not so clear. So let's go through and try to make some order. So he said, it's clear to me that if you live in a different city, you can't come and set up shop in another city unless you pay taxes. By the way, I was thinking about this, but if you live in a different city and you go and set up a store in a neighboring town, of course, you're going to pay taxes because you're going to be paying taxes for the rent of the space that you're using. So that would actually work. So then no one can really stop you as long as you're paying taxes to the city. But that seems to be talking about, and I didn't mention this yesterday, that seems to be talking about not in, now let's say, okay, I own a pizza store, the only pizza store in town, and you come open a pizza store. So you can't open it in the same alley where my pizza store is. You might pay taxes and therefore be allowed to, but you could go do it somewhere else in the city. Don't do it in my face. Okay, that's the point I didn't really mention yesterday, which would have to be said, otherwise the last question doesn't really make any sense. Then they say, if you live in the same alleyway as me though, and you want to also open a pizza store, well, then you have rights to do that. Because again, that's the rabbi's opinion against Rashbag, who says, no, Rashbag says you can stop your neighbor from having the same business as you. But according to the rabbis, no, you can't. If you live here too, you have every right to do it. The question is, and again, there's different interpretations of this question, but his question was, what if, let's just go with one interpretation, what if someone from a neighboring alleyway wants to open up a pizza store in my alleyway? Are they allowed to do that? Because on one hand, they live in the alley nearby, maybe that allows them. Some people think we mean, can they open it in their alleyway, which is nearby mine? But then it's hard to really ask the question, because if so, if someone in my own alleyway can do it, why would that person not be able to do it? So it's a bit of unclear exactly what his question, where the person who lives in the other mavoy, the other alley, where exactly they want to put up their store. I'm Rav Yosef, and now we're going to start with a bunch of exceptions. So Rav Yosef says, "Umodi Rav Huna b'mikrei dardike delo matzeh ma'akev." I'm at the bottom of Kapal Amud Bet. Rav Yosef says that Rav Huna, though, would agree that when it comes to a teacher, now it seems like a teacher of children. I wonder if this would be any teacher possible. Okay, delo matzeh ma'akev. If you want to open up, you're from another town and you come and you want to open up a school in my, right in my face, even it sounds like, you could do it. Da'amar mar, okay, whether you read this or not, we're going to skip the parentheses. Kin'at sofrim tarbeh chochma. Okay, very famous line, right? It's very important to have jealousy specifically when it comes to these kind of things, because it'll just make me make my school better, and your school will be better. And with that way, we can exponentially improve the school system, right? So every time, schools come up, a new program, a new, GAP program, but the competition just makes everybody better. And therefore it's allowed, even right next to right? There's always situations where this kind of thing goes on, but in the end, it's just better for Torah learning, and therefore it's permitted. Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak. So again, you have to ask the question, is it just children and maybe not B'tei Midrash for older people? Is it just because of the importance of teaching children, going back to our sugi yesterday of chinuch? And I hope you listened to Rabbanit if you climb, or if not, you can still listen about the important, and really about the communal responsibility of chinuch. And, or perhaps it's just learning in general and the importance of learning, and then it would apply to all ages. I'm Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak. Umode Rav Huna, another exception in a totally different category. Mode Rav Huna b'reid Rav Yoshua, berochlin hamachzirim ba'ayarot, delo matzeh ma'akev. The peddlers, we're talking particularly about perfumers who come and sell perfume. You have to remember, in those days, there was no such thing as deodorant. Perfume was their deodorant, okay? That you can't stop them from coming from other cities to sell perfume. Why is this? Da'amar mar, Ezra tiken lam l'Yisrael. And in addition to all these takanot that Ezra instituted, like reading the Torah on Mondays and Thursdays, okay, he also instituted Shiur machzirim ba'ayarot kedei shiyu tachshitim mitzuyim lebnei Yisrael. We want to make sure that women get what they need in terms of their hygiene, and therefore, tachshitim could be more like cosmetics as opposed to jewelry. It's not really jewelry, it's cosmetics, but to make themselves beautiful, smell better, all that, we allow. Okay, so again, we have a heter of a totally different sort in order to allow this. Some people think it's, it's for shalom bayit purposes. If the women smell, look ugly, they're not going to be beloved by their husbands, and it's going to create tension in the family. And perhaps that's why they thought this was a supreme value, or just perhaps because it affected 50% of the population. It was very important and a very basic need. So anyway, that's that. That's basically to allow them to walk around door-to-door salesman kind of thing, but not to establish a store. You can't come from outside and establish a perfumery, okay? But you can go on the streets, like put up a stand, like those stands in the malls or something like that, but not a permanent kind of thing. Okay, we're going to come back to this permanent, temporary in a bit of a different way in a bit. Now, if the person who's selling this is a Talmid Chacham, is a student who's learning Torah, they're even allowed to put up a store. Why? Now we'll see a case. Okay, another exception to the rule. This is an exception within an exception, right? We have an exception that you could come from out of town and bring your perfumes, but only in a particular way. But we're going to be much more lenient with you if you're a Talmid Chacham. Now, you have to wonder, and I seem to remember Sugyot about this, that not really the best business for a Talmid Chacham or a righteous person to be dealing with, because they would go house to house and sell perfume to women. Not exactly, they end up in situations where it's just them and the woman in the house, and they're selling cosmetics, and it's a little bit strange. But anyway, we're going to see two rabbis who were involved in this business. He allowed Rav Shaya and Rav Ada to actually set up a permanent store there. Now, it's a little bit strange saying this because we just said you could do it, but it seems to be saying this isn't the letter of the law. Okay, this is what we call lifnei mishurat hadin. This whole exemption that Talmidei Chachamim can set up shop is an exemption. And like a lifnei mishurat hadin beyond the letter of the law. My taima kevan Rabbanan atali tardu migirsadu. We don't want to distract them from their learning. We want to make sure they're able to learn properly. Now, if they're just walking around from place to place, it's going to waste a lot of time. They're not going to have a permanent, they're going to have to move to the next city and then to the next city and then to the next city. And it's impossible to learn in that kind of environment because the learning is so important. They need to focus. So we're going to make dispensation for them. Again, it becomes a tricky society when the Talmidei Chachamim are the ones with all these exemptions to things, right? You can see why that would create some tension possibly. Hanu dikulai da'aitu di, right? Apropos what we're going through now in Israel. Hanu dikulai da'aite diklai lebavel. Now there were people who different interpretations of this. Let's go with, they were making wicker baskets and they sold their wicker baskets. They brought it to Bavel. Bavel wasn't just the country, but also there was a city called Bavel. Probably that's what they're talking about. Otherwise, it's hard to understand. They brought it to Babylonia, the whole country. So it seems like they brought it to the city Bavel. People of the city said, "What are you doing? Selling your stuff in our city? Get out of here." They go before Ravina. So these people are trying to kick them out. Now they've already sold some stuff. So Ravina says, "Oh, sorry, this is a different. I'm confusing something. Sorry, we don't know if they sold yet. That's a different story." Anyway, they go before Ravina. So the people of the city don't want them selling their baskets here because it's taking away from their business. Ravina says to them, to the people of the city, he says, these people come from outside, but there's also buyers who come from the outside. So there's more people who need to buy baskets. So therefore, it's fine. They came from outside, the buyers come from outside, meaning there's enough to go around. Some people interpret this a little differently. They come from the outside, they'll sell to people who come from the outside, meaning they have to check whoever they're selling to. We're only going to allow them to sell to people who come from outside the city. But the city's inhabitants can only buy from the people who live in the city, and therefore it'll be clear that it won't take away, you'll at least have your basic business. The first interpretation seems more likely, that just there's more buyers there. It would be a weird shuk to be checking where do you live and where do you come from, and it would actually limit the people of the city. They could only buy from certain people. The whole thing sounds a bit strange, but there is some logic to that. But it seems more logical to say, well, they came from outside, but there's also buyers who come from outside. Therefore, there's more supply, but there's also more demand, and it's fine. V'hani mile, but there's some limitations of this. It's only b'yom deshuka. When do people come? On the market day. right? So on the market day, lots of people come from out of town, but nobody comes from out of town on a regular day. So they can't sell on a regular day. If it's not the day of the shuk, they can't sell. And even that, they can't go door to door. It was actually the perfume people are allowed to go door to door, and we prefer they go door to door. Here they're saying, if they're selling in the shuk, that's allowed, because that's where, remember, this is all because we want them, whether directly or just as a general picture, they're kind of servicing the people from outside. The people from outside aren't the ones door to door, so they can't go to the local people and knock on their doors. They could just work in the shuk. Hanu Amorai, Da'aiti Amra Lepumnara. There were people who were wool sellers, so they brought their wool to Pumnara from outside the city. So again, the people of the city came to stop them. Now, this is the case where they had already sold some merchandise, and we're going to see that they sold it on credit, so they were owed money by people. So when they go to kick them out of the city, they went in front of Rav Kahana. Rav Kahana said, look, the law is with them. They can stop you. This is our city. They can make you leave. Amrulei, Itlan Ashrai. But they said, but we're owed money from people. It's going to take them a few months till they pay us back. So then they said, basically, if we leave town, we're going to lose that money. If we don't leave town and we just wait around for our money, what, we're not going to sell all that time? How are we going to make a living? We have nothing to live off of. We live off of what we sell. So Amar Lahu Zilu Zavnu Shiur Chayutaifu Ada Akritu Ashrai Ditchu Vazlitu. So he says, fine, I'll give you time. In the next few, whatever it is, weeks, months, whatever time it takes you to collect all your bills, which, some people never actually manage to collect all their bills, so who knows how long that could be. But until you collect all your money, you're allowed to sell, he said here, Ad Shiur Chayutaifu, just as much as you need to live. In other words, I don't want you making profits here. You can sell your basic in order to have food for that time period, and then then you got to go. Now we get to a fascinating story, Rav Dimi from Hadran. Rav Dimi, you might remember, he's one of the Nechuti, which are the people who came from Israel to Babylonia and would bring the Torah of Babylonia with them. Today we're going to learn that perhaps he wasn't going for the purpose of bringing the Torah. He was going because of business, okay? He's going to come on a boat with his dried figs, and he's going to want to sell them in Babylonia. Now, while he was in Babylonia anyway, he also was a Talmid Chacham, and he would bring the Torah. But in this story, we're going to see they didn't know who Rav Dimi was, which makes sense. He came from far away. They had no idea he was a Torah scholar. So Rav Dimi comes from Hadran. A fascinating story comes about. A fascinating but an interesting story with a Talmudic story ending. I'll just warn you about that. He comes from Hadran. I take glot b'spina. He brings the dried figs in a boat. So remember who the characters are. There's the Reish Galuta, he's the head of Babylonia, the exilarch. He says to Rava, who's the biggest rabbi of the time, Huk Haze, go check. Eat Sorva me Rabbanit. If he's a Talmid Chacham, we don't know this guy from a hole in the wall. If he's a Talmid Chacham, Nakit le Shuka, then give him exclusive rights in the shuk for the figs, for fig selling, dried figs. Okay? You can give him exclusive rights. Because again, they had this approach toward Talmidei Chachamim, which now we're going to see is a little bit dangerous, because now you have to check people. And how do you do a test if someone's a Talmid Chacham? So instead of Rava doing it himself, maybe it was a bit of a critique of this story, Rava says, I'm on Rava Rav Ada bar Abba. He goes to Rav Ada bar Abba and he says to him, Puk taile b'kankane. Go look in his jug. Okay, meaning go check him out. Let's see if his, it reminds me of the story where Rabban Gamliel would only let in people the tocho kiboro, their inside was like their outside. He's check what's inside of him. Check if he's a Talmid Chacham. Let's see his stuff. So Nafik Azal, so he goes out to greet him. And Rav Ada bar Abba asks him the following question. A very odd question. Okay, if I were to quiz you, how much do you know? If I start asking you a question in Tuma and Tara, impurities, you'll be like, oh no, don't ask me a question about that, right? So what does he ask him? Not only a question about impurity, but a very strange one. Pil shabalak fifa mitzrit. If an elephant swallows a basket, like a wicker basket or some kind of basket made of the leaves of an arava, okay, like aravot that we use on Sukkot. Okay, he swallows one of these. Vihiki'ah derech beitari, and it comes out with his excrement. Get a little disgusting. And the question is this still a vessel or not? Now, there's a debate about what exactly the case is. Was it whole when it went in and came out whole again? Okay, well, there's actually a Mishna about this, and then maybe that's why he asked this question, because it was a basic Mishna, and he should know it. I'm sure you all heard this Mishna before. Maybe not the most popular Mishnayot. And some people think that we're talking about another question that comes up in Sugya that talks about this. Okay, the Sugya Menachot about this, we'll get there. That the raw materials went into the elephant and came out as a basket. And then the question is it makabel tumah or not? Okay, do we view this as a vessel because the vessel was created in the body and came out? Either which way, it was quite a strange question. And let's see what Rav Dimi says. Lo mahu. So he says, what's the story? Lo ave biyad. He didn't know the answer. Didn't know how to answer the question. Amar le. Now, then Rav Dimi, showing again a bit of ignorance, goes to Rav Ada bar Abba and says, Marni hu Rava, you must be Rava, because who else would quiz me if not, he had heard the reputation of Rava. Tafach le besandale. Rav Ada kind of knocks him gently, but on his sandal. Amar le, bein didi le Rava ikatuva. There's a lot between me and Rava. Okay, he's way greater than me. Don't confuse me for Rava. You wouldn't think it would be, it's not like it's insulting, it's actually a compliment, but he gets offended, like, you don't know anything. And he says, Miu al korcha, ana rabcha, virava, rabba de rabba. He says, look, if we're putting people in, who's in charge of who, well, I'm your rabbi, because I clearly know more than you. And Rava is my rabbi. So basically, your relationship, he says to Rav Dimi, with Rava is your rabbi's rabbi. Okay, and basically you got it all wrong. Lo naptule shuka. Okay, needless to say, he didn't give him exclusive rights in the shuk. And sod groti day, and all of his dried figs rotted and were gone. Okay, so he comes to Babylonia. You can imagine it's like the Jew comes to America thinking the Golden Medina, and I'm going to have a great business, and then gets nowhere. So he comes to Babylonia with all his stuff, and everything gets ruined. After the command of Rav Yosef, now smart, he didn't go to Rava's Beit Midrash, court to rule him. He goes to somewhere else. He goes to Rav Yosef. He goes to Rav Yosef and he says to him, Amar lahu, my Abduli, did you see what they did to me? And besides, we all know Rav Dimi is a Talmud Chacham. Okay, so by the way, he was from the Nehardea. He wasn't from Israel, but he also learned in Israel, and so perhaps because of that, they didn't really know him. And we don't know what city he came to. Okay, the story started out, it's Rav Dimi from the Nehardea, which is interesting that they give us a location where he's from, considering, right, this whole thing, he came from far and whatever. Okay, so now Amarle, Rav Yosef says to him, Man de lo shahiye la onita de malka de Edom, the one who didn't wait and immediately punish those who embarrassed or did something bad to the king of Edom, which is another word for God, which we're going to see from a pasuk in Amos. Lo nishe lo onitech. Onitech is from ona'ah. Remember, we had ona'at varim, ona'at mamon. This is really both. He was verbally abused and he was also financially abused. Says God won't wait, and don't worry, they'll get punished for what they did to you. Dichtiv, how do we know about this Melech Edom thing? There's a whole list in the beginning of Amos about all the Gentile nations and the punishments they will get for the bad things they did, and then it ends with the punishments the Jews will get for what they did. Anyway, it's a fascinating, if you've never read those chapters, it's very powerful chapters. Anyway, he says here, there's the 3 sins of Moab. For all of them, it says, Al Shlosha Pish'ei this, Al Arba'alo Ashivenu, and for the 4th, I really won't, hold back from punishing them. What's the 4th? Al Sarfo Atzmot Melech Edom Lasid. They burn the bones of the king of Edom into lime. Okay, so basically, Moab was punished by God for what they did to Edom, the king of Edom. For sure, God's going to get his rewards, punish those who did this to you. And like every good Talmudic story ends, although it's not going to end yet, Nach Nafshe Rav Ada bar Abba. And he dies, in fact, for what he did. Okay, so that's why I said perhaps Rava was responsible. Perhaps Rava would have done it in a way that wasn't so humiliating. But instead he gave it to Rav Ada to do, and look what happened. Now, What happens in the wake of Rav Ada bar Abba's death is something very fascinating. All these rabbis come and claim it's my fault that he died. And we're going to see they all take responsibility for having killed him. Okay? Some related to this story, some related to some other story. Tosfot says here, okay, on the words ana anishte, because basically we're saying, I'm the one who did this terrible, right? It's for my punishment that something I did wrong caused his death. Each one complained that it's because of me, because it says in Masechet Shabbat, if you cause the death of someone else, you will not go into the gate, you will not enter the courtyard of God. Okay? So they're all basically claiming, I can't believe, I caused his death and now I'm going to be punished for it. It's an interesting thing. I think it's actually connected to what we've been learning, because it's all about preventative measures, right? You should have thought beforehand and should have realized the ramifications, the long-term ramifications of your actions. And that's why each of these rabbis claims, had I not done this, that wouldn't have happened. So it really connects with the same idea here, where it's taking, instead of, with neighbors and causing damages, but the same kind of idea of preventing yourself from doing something, because you have to look at what's going to happen down the road. So let's see the list of people and what they all have to say. Rav Yosef Amar, Ana Anishte, I caused him to be punished. De Ana Laitite, because I cursed him, right? Rav Yosef was the one who said, the one who, exacted punishment on Moab is going to exact punishment on the people who embarrassed you. So that's pretty clear. Rav Dimi minahar de Amar, Ana Anishte, de Asi Grogro Didi, right? It's my fault because I lost all my dried figs, and on account of that, I complained, and on account of that, he was punished. Abba Amar, Ana Anishte. Now here we're going to get off topic. These don't have to do with this story. They have to do with other stories. Abba says, because of me. Rabbanit. Rav Ada would say to the rabbis, Amidar Germitu Garme be Abba, Tu Achlu Bisra Shamina be Rava. Instead of going and chewing bones, right? How much do you get off a bone? Not a lot. Chewing bones in the Beit Midrash of Abba, you should go where there's good fatty meat in the Beit Midrash of Rava. And it didn't mean that the cafeteria was better in that Beit Midrash and that. He meant, obviously, the Torah is better. Okay, the Torah is better by Rava. And on account of that, Abba is saying, because I wasn't as good a teacher as Rava was, that caused Rav Ada, again, this is very indirect, that caused Rav Ada to insult me, and because he insulted me, he died. Rava Amar Ana Anishte. When he would go to the butcher shop to buy meat, Rav Ada, Amar Luhu Letabache, Ana Shakilna Bisra Mikame Shame de Rava. Ana Adif Namine, right? You ever go into the butcher shop and someone comes and cuts the line? He would cut the line and go in front of the shamash of Rava and say, I'm more important. Now, it's a little bit strange to say he would say he's more important than Rava, because he already said Rava is my rabbi earlier in the story. But it seems that he was saying I'm more important than Rava's servant. In other words, there's Rava, there's me, and then there's his servant. Yes, he's important, but and that really wasn't appropriate because it didn't show respect for Rava. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak Amar, Ana Anishte, it's my fault. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak Reish Kalahava. He was the head of the academy, or he would give like the big shiur. And Kol Yom Makame Deneo Latala Mirahit Bahade Rav Ada bar Abba Lishmate. Every day before shiur, he would go over the shiur with Rav Ada, Bahadar Ay Lakala, and then he would give the shiur. So he would review it. It was like his, sounding board. Review it with Rav Ada, and then he would go give the shiur. Well, Hahul Yoma, there was one day, and we're going to see it was the day that Rav Ada died, which is why in the end the Gemara is going to say, by the way, we never heard when he died. It just says Rav Ada died. It wasn't clear he died on the day that incident happened, right? Because Rav Yosef just said, oh, he'll get punished at some point, and then he died at some point. We don't know when. But this story, he died right in the middle of the story, and you'll see. And therefore, the Gemara is going to say it was probably likely this story. So, and it was probably likely Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak's fault. So what happened? So on the way to go to review the shiur with Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, Rav Papa and Rav Huna bar Rav Yoshua stop Rav Ada while he's on his way. Mishum de lo havu b'siyuma, because they missed the end of Rava's shiur. Okay, there was a few shiurim going on. This Rav Yitzchak, this Rava. They missed the end of the shiur, and they wanted to know. If you don't get to the end of the shiur, you don't get to find out what the halacha is. So Amrule Emalan Hanish Matata de Maser Behema Hechi Amrinu Rav. What did Rava say about Maser Behema? We missed the end. Amar Luhu Hachi Amarava, the Hachi Amarava. Now here you could say there were, right? If they were only asking what the halacha is, why was he going on at length, right? It seems like he went on a little bit longer than he should have when he needed to be somewhere else and needed to be helping Rav Nachman, Rav Nachman for his shiur. So, in the meantime, it was getting late. His shiur was supposed to start. They said to Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, "No, you're giving the shiur. It's late. It's late. Lama yativmar. Why are you sitting?" Amar lahu yativna v'kaminatra la'arsei de Rav Ada bar Abba. I'm sitting here because they're about to bring the beer of Rav Ada bar Abba. Basically, he's going to die because of what he did. That's a pretty harsh punishment for, right? It could be Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak was embarrassed that he hadn't given a shiur yet. Why he wasn't willing to give it without having gone through it with Rav Ada is another good question. He was obviously very angry and very upset, and he said the following statement. And in fact, obviously what happened was, Amrle Rabbanan Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, Adahachi nafik kala denach nafshe Rav Ada bar Abba. In the meanwhile, the word started spreading that Rav Ada bar Abba was dead. And it seems like he really was the one who caused his death. Okay, fascinating stories. Interesting how everybody kind of took responsibility for his death. In the end, though, the timing seems to indicate who was really right about it and who wasn't. And again, I really think this has to do with the idea of always thinking a few steps ahead. What are going to be the ramifications of my actions, whether it's in words, whether it's in financial issues, whether it's in neighbor relations, and what kind of damage I could cause, right? That really seems to be the theme of what's going on here. Okay. I see you're asking, Terry, about why they were fighting over who was responsible. That's what I read you in Tosfot, that the issue is really who's going to be punished for this. And each one thought, right? I was thinking it's kind of like Jewish guilt, right? That everybody felt like it's my fault and I'm going to get punished for this, okay? Because I'll get punished that I won't be able to enter that inner courtyard of God when I get up to heaven. Okay, new Mishna. Back to our issues here of okay, this Mishnah is not going to be so comprehensible yet. We're going to have to somewhat wait for the Gemara to explain it better. But let's try to literally explain. If my wall was next to your wall, don't put up another wall. Seems weird. Third wall? There's already two walls. Don't put up another wall unless you distance 4 cubits. So it's gonna seem like one fell down and then you want to rebuild it, you have to distance it 4 cubits, but we're going to talk, there's some issues with that too. So we'll have to wait and see. If your wall is opposite a window, if your top of your wall is either above it, below it, or opposite the window, like the height of the wall goes opposite the height of the window, either which way you have to distance it 4 cubits. We're going to talk about what this means and what this is. Okay. So the first question is, it sounded like you had a wall next to your neighbor's wall. It fell down. The new wall you can't build unless you put it 4 cubits away. So it sounds like perhaps your first wall was closer. So the Gemara says, well, right, and only the second wall can't be built. You know, you have to leave it 4 cubits away. So they say, Kama hechisamach, how was the first one closer then? Doesn't make any sense. So Amar Rav Yehuda Hachi Kamar, Rav Yehuda says, this is what it means to say, turning out on the bed. According to Rav Yehuda, what this means is the first wall you can't put up within 4. You have to stay 4 cubits away with any wall you're going to build next to your friend's wall, even the first wall. So Rava says, okay, that's very nice that you're saying that and logical, but it certainly doesn't match the wording of the Mishnah. The Mishnah said, it seems like you already had a wall. So you can't say this means don't build a wall next to your friend's wall unless you distance it 4 cubits, because it seems to be talking about a second time you build a wall, not the first time. So Ella Amar Rava, and that's really what we're going to deal with for the rest of this section before we get to the next Mishnah of Rava's opinion here. Rava says, Hachi Katani, this is how to read the Mishnah. Misha haya kotlo samuch lekotel shel chavero berichuk 4 amot. Your first wall was already 4 distant. V'nafal, and then it fell. Lo yismoch lo kotel achel, ela im ken yirchik mimenu 4 amot. When you build your second wall, make sure you don't put it any closer than the first wall, and it has to be 4 cubits away. My time. Well, what's the big chiddush here? What do you? First of all, why do you need space between walls? What's the point? Well, didav shedahacha ma'ale lahatam. The issue is that even though you already had a wall up, and the person's wall has been there a while, but the walls always need the strengthening of the ground nearby, and you want to leave 4 cubits is always a space for people to walk by. Okay, 4 cubits, by the way, is approximately like between 6 and 7 feet. Okay, now that's a space where people go by. You want people to be walking there because if people walk in between, they'll strengthen the wall of your neighbor. So even though this is your property and you theoretically could build wherever you want your property, you have the distance of 4 cubits from your neighbor's wall, so it strengthens their wall by people being able to walk nearby. So it's a little bit strange, this idea, but that's what he says. And Rav now limits this and says, well, lo shanu ela kotel gina. That's if the wall of your neighbor was a wall with their garden. Why? Because if it's a wall of their garden, they don't walk on the other side of it. Nobody walks there because if you walk there, you'll trample on the garden. But aval kotel chatzer, if it was a wall of their courtyard, people walk on the other side. That already is enough to strengthen the wall. You don't need to strengthen it on both sides. So in balismach somech, and therefore, if you want to put your wall right up against there, you can because the people of the courtyard walk by on the other side, and that's enough. Rav Oshaya amar chad kotel ginav, chad kotel chatzer, and balismach no somech. Rabbi Yosef says it doesn't matter if it's a wall of a garden, it doesn't matter if it's a wall of a courtyard, you still need it seemingly on both sides for people to walk. But Amar Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Chanina lo pligi. Rabbi Yosef Bar Chanina says there's really no machloket between Rav and Rabbi Yosef. Ha bi'il yeshana, ha bi'ir chadasha. Each one is talking about a different scenario. Depends how old your city is. If your city is very old, then your ground should be pretty solid. And therefore, you don't need, that's where Rav says, only if it's a kotel gina and people don't walk on the other side, you have to leave this side open for people to walk. But in Rabbi Yosef, but the Rabbi Yoshaya was talking about in a new city. In a new city, you have to leave space no matter what, because all the ground on both sides of the wall needs strengthening because it's a new city and the ground is not solidified enough. Now we get to some questions, 2 questions against Rava, one from our Mishna and one from the next Mishna, which we're going to see in the Mishna in a minute, because in a few minutes we'll get there before the end of today's talk. Tanan, hachalonot, bein milamalam, bein milamata, bein mikinegdan, arba amot, and now we're going to explain it by bringing a braita. Vitane Allah, there's a braita that says, milamalan, and now we'll go case by case. If your wall is, the top of your wall is opposite the window, it's above the window, it has to be, okay, now what does this mean? You have to raise your wall so that the top of your wall is 4 cubits above the window. Okay, so basically if your height of your wall is going to be above the window, you have to make sure that it's 4 cubits above the window and not 3 cubits, 2 cubits, 1 cubit. Why? Because the assumption is that people stand on top of their walls. And if you stand on top of the wall, you'll be able to see into your neighbor's property. So the whole issue here is privacy, and therefore, okay, so that you won't accidentally look in. By the way, this is apropos. I was reading the news yesterday, and there was an article about these. There's a lot of in Israel, I'm sure, in all sorts of places. They've started putting in a lot of municipalities have been putting in cameras to check for all sorts of things. Give out traffic tickets and parking and all sorts of things. And one of the things they discovered, I forget how you translate this, but the Bakera Medina, the person who kind of checks that things are okay in the country, and the kind of checking up on the country, they found that a lot of these cameras actually take photos they look into people's houses, and that they're basically breaking privacy rules. And I was thinking exactly what we're talking about, this breaking of privacy rules. And, and they said, there's a really big problem in the country of all sorts of people all sorts of these cameras that are basically they are taking photos in people's houses, which is crazy. Okay, or you can see into people's houses. How they built them that way is really insane. And the law, by the way, says that they can't, it's already in the law, which makes sense, obviously. Anyway, I thought about it as we were learning this. Okay, so now So above, you have to make sure it's high above so that you can't have a good angle to look inside the house when you stand on top of your wall. Milamata, and if you're below, then again, you have to have 4 cubits from the top of your window so that, because again, 4 cubits, if it's 6 feet, 7 feet, it's the height of a person. If you stand on top of your wall and there's less than 4 cubits, you're going to be looking right into their window at eye level, right? So basically make sure you're more than 4 cubits below, so if you stand on top of your wall, you won't see into their house. Umi kenegdan, now the one that's opposite, now here the sounds is exactly like our case. Don't build a wall opposite your friend's wall if it has a window in it. It's a little bit different, but if it has a window, shelo ya'afil. Because why? You'll cause the sun will not be able to go through because your wall is opposite their wall and it blocks the sun. And it'll be dark in their house. Tama, now notice, what's the reason? Shelo ya'afil. Afal mishum daf shelo. It doesn't say, now remember, the friend's window is in a wall. So that means your wall is opposite the friend's wall. You should have to leave 4 cubits because, according to Rava, because of the ground. The people walk there. It doesn't say that here. It says because of the darkness in the Batra, right? The Batra comes to explain that Mishna. To which they say, all these walls we're talking about, and certainly if you look in the Quran, and they had some pictures of these walls, all these walls, whether below, above the window, opposite the window, it's not the way I described it. It's 2 walls, one opposite the other, and one has a window and one doesn't. No, it's a wall perpendicular to the wall. And then, again, if you're standing on top of your wall, you can look in on an angle, right? And if you're standing below, you can look in. So, but even if it's perpendicular, you can look in. And it'll make it darker because, again, when the sun's on that side, the wall will block the sun from going in. And therefore, it's not an issue of dafsha at all because the space in front of the house, the wall, is totally open. People can walk there because yours is perpendicular. It's not parallel. It's not blocking any walkway. So then they say v'kama. So if it's perpendicular, well, then how far does it have to be from the wall? They say, the width of the window, that's how distant, when your wall is perpendicular, that's how distant it needs to be. But wait, isn't it a problem that if your wall, in the last case, is opposite the window, the height of the window, well, if you stand on top of your wall, you'll be able to see into the window, right? We said if it's going to be above, it has to be 4 cubits above. So aren't we worried about that? What happened to that issue? So they say, it must be that the kotel, you have, the only way you can have this kotel is perpendicular and right, and distance a little, right? This tefach is a little weird because we said 4 amma. We're going to have to deal with that. Why all of a sudden they came up with a new measurement? We didn't really deal with that. We're going to get to it in a minute. But you have to distance it somewhat from the wall so it doesn't make it too dark there. But why aren't we worried that you're going to see into the house and that you have to distance it for that reason? They say, right, distance the height of it, because you must have built this one. You have to build this one on a slope. And if you build the wall on a slope, the top of the wall is sloped downward, well, then no one can stand on it, right? You're only going to stand on a wall that's straight, not a wall that's sloped down. So you have to slope the wall. This is talking about basically the issue is just shelo ya'afil. It's not an issue that we're worried you don't have to change the height of it. You just have to change the distance so that it doesn't make it darker in the other person's house to block the sunlight. But you don't have to change the height because we're not worried about privacy issues because you're sloping your wall. If your wall isn't sloped, then obviously you can't put it there opposite the window. Vahanan's not arbamo. Now we go back to this question. Wait, you said you have to distance it 1 tefach, Rav Yiva said, but didn't we say 4 cubits in the Mishnah? That's what we just said. That was the whole Mishnah. If it's opposite, which we now said isn't opposite, but perpendicular, has to be 4 cubits away. So why are you saying one tefach? 1 tefach and 4 cubits is a huge difference. So remember, each amma has 6 tefachs in it, 6 tefachim. So the Gemara answers, lo kasha kam miruach achad kam mishtei rucham. If, okay, it's shaped like a T, where you have 2 walls, right? You have one big wall, but it's on both sides of the other person's wall like a T. Then you have to distance it 4 cubits because that's really blocking the sunlight. If it's only on one, right, it's like an L shape, you're at the bottom of the L and they're the base of the L, then we're not worried. You can move it a tefach, that's enough to get enough light in there and it's fine because you're not blocking the light from all the sides. You're only blocking it when the sun's on one side. It's not such a big deal. Okay, so that was all the first question against Rava, which was our Mishnah seems to say wall, opposite wall, isn't worried about davsha. We resolved that because we said that's not what we're talking about. It's perpendicular, and then we remove any issues. Second question is from the next Mishna. Tashma, ve'eta kotel mina maschila arba amot. You have to distance your wall from the gutter of your neighbor's roof. Why? Now, the gutter is obviously by their wall. You would have to, according to Rava, why would you distance it from the gutter? Because you would distance it from the wall 4 cubits, right? Because people need to walk on the ground. But that's not what it says in the Mishnah. It says kadesh is okay for. You can't prevent your neighbor from putting up their ladder to get up to the gutter. Otherwise, how else are they going to clean out their gutter if they can't put a ladder there? And the ladder needs to be angled, and therefore they need 4 cubits. So you have to make sure that you don't put a wall. If you put a wall, there's no way they're going to be able to put their ladder there. But tama mishum desulam, but aval mishum dav shalo. But it doesn't say. It says kadesh is okay for tasulam, so you can put the ladder up. It doesn't say it's because of the floor, the ground, and to strengthen the wall. So what we're talking about a roof with a gutter that's angled down, meaning it's just like our roofs are. They're distant from the wall of the house, right? So the imishum davsha, if you want davsha, kazavaze tute. You have the space between where the gutter juts out to the wall of the house, let's say, is 1 cubit. So you would only have to distance it 3 cubits from the gutter for the issue of the davsha, of the walking, because on the ground, there's plenty of space underneath the gutter to walk. And therefore, you have to distance it more for this issue of the ladder. Okay, so if there's a gutter in their house, then it has to be distanced even more from, if it's, let's say, a wall of their house and not a wall of their property, but a wall of their house, which has a sloped gutter or roof that, basically it's extended beyond the wall of the house, then you'd have to distance it even more because of the ladder issue. And that's what that Mishnah is teaching us, and therefore it's not a difficulty with Rava. And with that, we're going to move on to the next Mishnah, which we already read part of. The first part we didn't read yet, which is Marchikim et hasulam min hashovach arba amot, kedei shelo tikpotz hanimiyah. If I have a ladder in my garden, I have to distance it 4 cubits from, even though it's in my property, I have to distance it 4 cubits from your dovecote. Because if it's within 4 cubits of your dovecote, some little creature, the Koran calls it a mongoose, okay, can climb up that ladder, jump over to your dovecote and eat the birds, okay, and devour them. So therefore, in order to prevent damage, again, I can't leave my ladder, even though it's in my property, within 4 cubits of your dovecote. And like we said, this is funny because one is move your ladder and one is move your wall so that there's not a ladder problem, that the person can't put their ladder up. So they both relate to ladders, but in opposite ways. So now the Mishnah says, they're going to deal with the first case, and that's it for today. It seems like our Mishnah is not like Rabbi Yossi, because remember Rabbi Yossi. What did Rabbi Yossi say? Rabbi Yossi, ha'amal zechoper b'toch shelo v'zenotea b'toch shelo. Rabbi Yossi's opinion is, everyone's allowed to do whatever they want. So why do I have to worry about the doves that are in your dovecote? Dovecote, by the way, you asked a question. It's dovecote, COTE, and it's a place where they would basically house doves, and also doves would fly into there. We talked about the shovach a lot, like there's aliyah, there's people would kind of gather doves in those places. Doves would fly in. People would then kind of take ownership over them because doves were hefker, ownerless. A lot of people had these, they're places for doves to rest, basically. If you go to the Beit Shemesh area, there's all these caves with also built into the caves, they have places for doves to rest. So, okay. Now, remember Rabbi Yossi, he says, everyone can do whatever they want. I could do whatever I want in my yard. Why do I have to be worried about that this mongoose is going to climb up and go into your dovecote? Well, Rav Ashi, Afilu Tema Rabbi Yossi. We can explain the Mishnah even according to Rabbi Yossi because Rav Ashi, Ki Avina be Rav Kahana Hava Amar Mode Rabbi Yossi begirei didei. And here I want to be very clear about these terms because it's going to get a little tricky. Girei didei means my direct arrows, which means, it means sort of 2 things. An action I do will cause damage. We would say directly, but you're going to see it's not really directly. The damage I do, it's like I shot an arrow. So that means I shoot an arrow, I cause damage. And it's usually immediate, and it's from my action, the damage. Now, this is Geri D-Day because I put up my ladder, and as a result, so they're going to say, well, why is this Geri D-Day? Could be right when I put the ladder down, Yatva Bechor Bakafse came right out of its hole and jumped up the ladder and went and ate the bird. So because it could be a situation where I could do an action and my action would directly cause the damage. It's not exactly direct. We're going to see in a minute because it's indirect. I put it there and then the animal climbed up. So it's still called Geri Dige because I shot it. I did the action that caused the damage and it caused it immediately. But they say Vahagramahu, but it's indirect. I put it up and then the animal climbed and did it. I didn't do the damage. The animal did it. Right? It was indirect. Amar Rav Tobi Bar Matna, Zot Omeret Grama B'Nezikin Asr. From here we can learn the grama b'nezikin is forbidden. And what do you mean? Didn't we learn all in Bava Kama? Grama, you're not chayav? So now this fascinating line here. You're not liable to pay for damages through grama, but they're forbidden. You can't cause grama damages. And by you putting that ladder there, it's likely going to cause someone else to cause the damages, but it's your direct action that caused the indirect action to happen. So it's direct and indirect, sort of. It's a little confusing. So Geri delay means I shot the arrow. I did the action. Now, why is this different than a tree? Because a tree, I plant my tree, and it's the roots are going to go to your bore. Now, it's true I planted the tree, but the roots damaging your bore are going to come over time, right? That's a much longer process. It's not something immediate. It's not like my direct arrows went and ruined your bore. That's a different story. Okay, so that's how we explain this. We're going to get more into grama. There's going to be a gefet about it, but it might take I'm not sure how quickly it will go up, but there will be a gefet soon on the grama issue. Okay, so what do we have today? We started with all the competition, and then we dealt with all the exceptions to the rule, particularly Talmud Chachamim, which led us to the whole crazy Rav Dimi story and all the rabbis trying to take responsibility for his death, for Rav Ada's death. And then we got to the issues of preventative damages again. I can't put my wall in a way where I might look into your house, where I might cause darkness in your house, where I might cause the wall not to be strong enough, the ground. I have to help strengthen your wall, right? And then we had the first case in the Mishna and the second case, and then we had to explain how they work together and what the first case really meant. Rava gave his explanation after we rejected the first one. And then we raised two problems with it, one with the second part of the Mishnah, and then also with the following Mishnah. And then we dealt with the following Mishnah, which really, and the issue of particularly the Sulam from the Shabbat. And there we had the issue of, is this not according to Rabbi Yosef? And then we explained it even according to Rabbi Yosef, because even in this case, Rabbi Yosef would admit it's a more immediate kind of damage. And therefore, even though it's indirect, it's immediate. And in the indirectness is not an issue because you actually are forbidden from indirect damages, even though you actually don't have to pay for them. But in this world, we're talking about preventing, and therefore you have to prevent that. With that, we'll finish for today. Wishing everyone a good day and Shema B'Shalom Tova.